Hey everyone, this is Wet Slicks. We're back on TT Isle of Man Riding the Edge 3. Today we're not going to be doing any riding whatsoever, but a couple of people asked me about my control settings and stuff. So thought we kind of go through all of that today, control settings and bike settings and stuff. Thought it might be useful for people. So in terms of the control settings, there's kind of basically four or five main ones. There's throttle, the brakes, steering left and right. That's pretty much it. For me, I think that makes a difference to the game. So I tend to be quite heavy-handed, I would say, on the throttle and probably on the brakes as well. So I have my sensitivity at -2, dead zone at 2. So those are kind of the main settings for that one. The front brake I have at 0 and 1. And of course I have joint brakes as well, so the rear brake doesn't really matter too much. Steering, I think, is probably the main setting that people might struggle with, and it was something that I really struggled with, and I kind of had to look up eventually what maybe were the best settings for it. So I have mine at -2 sensitivity and 5 dead zone, which seems kind of counterintuitive because normally what we're struggling with in this game is the sensitivity of the steering, of the leaning. The bikes won't lean very easily. But this really seemed to work for some reason. So steer right is at the same, -2 and 5, saturation at 100%. And that seemed to help the leaning of the bikes and how quickly they lean through corners and everything like this. In terms of ABS, traction control, anti-wheelie, and engine brake, you can see those on the bottom right of the screen there. With the Super Sports, I tend to now have, I used to have my ABS at 1, now I have it at 0 because the bikes don't very often lock up at all on that front brake. Traction control normally I have at 1 for the Super Sports. I don't normally struggle a huge amount with the wheels sort of slipping on traction. When you're in the wet, you might want to change these settings as well and normally bump up traction control if I'm riding in the wet. Anti-wheelie normally at 1 as well because even the Super Sports do wheelie a little bit. And something I again struggle with sometimes in this game, just going over random little like bumps and dips, the bikes can like unexpectedly throw you off. So I find just having these at like 1 tends to stop a lot of those maybe unexpected falls when the bike's like wheeling about. Engine braking at 3, which I find useful just to scrub off a little bit of speed by coming off the accelerator on a lot of turns. And on the super bikes, I tend to have these a little bit higher. So that would normally be for the super bikes. I'd have my ABS at 1 because those do tend to lock up under braking, but maybe not as badly as I had originally had it on 2, and I've dropped it to 1 without too many issues. But of course, because the bikes have so much more power, you do get a lot more wheel spin. So I tend to leave traction control at 2 and anti-wheelie at 2 as well. You can drop it to 1 if you're feeling adventurous and you like the bikes, kicking up with the wheelies. It is a lot of fun to do. However, again, I just sometimes struggle with the bikes unexpectedly throwing you off. And this is on intermediate physics as well. This isn't even on realistic. So good luck to you if you're on realistic settings. I find it so hard to run in this game on realistic because you just drop the bike unexpectedly everywhere. Slow corners, fast corners, under braking, over little hills and the bumps and the dips and everything. So hard to control the bikes. So all the respect to the people that can run it on that. So super bikes, those tend to be my settings on ABS, traction control, anti-wheelie, and engine brake. 1, 2, 2, and a 3. As I said, in the wet, again, you might want to bump those up a little bit. Let's just go into this and have a quick look at the settings for the bikes themselves. So there are a couple of main settings. Transmission, you can increase if you want the first couple of gears. The main thing I would say for a lot of these bikes around the mountain course is top gear, is getting the top speed out of the bike that you possibly can, especially this Triumph, because it doesn't have particularly good top speed necessarily. So you want to drop that. And Ride 5, I seem to remember Ride 4 and Ride 5, some of the milestone games, have the transmissions the other way around. Whereas if you want the top speed, you're having to increase the gearing. With this game, it's minus. So I tend to have 6th gear at -3 or 4 to try and take advantage of that top speed down some of those very, very long straights. You can increase some of the lower gears. You barely use first gear really. So you can have that quite high. So then you don't have to, and second gear as well. So then maybe you just use second gear and don't ever even drop into first. Maybe at the nook or something like that at the end of the course. And then suspension settings. I've talked about this in the past. I've messed around with suspension settings so much to try and make the bikes easier to turn, easier to lean. And some other people, will have 2 on this and 6 on this, and have it a lot different. I found for myself dropping all of these to 1 made a massive difference. So I have that on both the front and the back. No idea whether it's just me being completely mad and whether it makes no difference whatsoever. But for me personally, I found that makes a huge difference to how quickly the bikes are able to turn. Dropping both front and rear suspensions down to 1 has helped massively. And then a setting that I didn't really realize existed whatsoever until fairly recently is tire pressures as well, which I've just been messing around with today a little bit. And these differ for the dry and the wet. I found dropping the tire pressures to the minimum made the bikes quite, I don't know what the best way to describe it is, but they were a little bit all over the place. And although the bikes were a little bit more agile, maybe it did feel again easier turning, easier sort of getting into the corners. The bike just felt a little bit more unstable. Whereas the opposite, increasing the tire pressures to the maximum, meant that the bike was very precise but not very agile, very slow to lean, very slow to turn. I was having to back off a lot of corners because I wasn't. You were able to get the lines that you wanted, but you weren't able to carry them through and get the same speed that you would through. So I found generally kind of a compromise is a good way to work this, but trying to decrease the tire pressures, as much as, especially on the front. I found minimum tire pressure on the dry. In the wet, we are at, I think, the midpoint. No, just 1 click up, I think. So it's the 30.5 psi is the middle point. So we're just dropping that slightly to 29 in the wet. And then the back wheel is, again, 1 click up from the minimum. And I think the midpoint in the wet. Yeah, and this is for the super sports. Those were the settings that I found. I was able to get the precise, nice lines that I wanted, but I was also able to carry the speed through. The bike felt nice and agile, felt easy to turn, and I was able to get a bit more of a flow, which tends to be what you want. Pretty much got the same settings now with the Superbike. Front and rear suspensions both tuned to the minimum-ish. I've just got rebound and spring hardness on 2 on both front and back. To be honest, again, no idea whether that makes a difference, but I've messed around with these settings so much at this point, trying to find setups that work for me, and these are the setups I found just have the best feeling, I guess. Again, Superbikes, the transmission, yeah, very similar, with the first couple of gears being more towards acceleration and the last gear in particular being more towards top speed. You tend to get pretty similar top speed with -3, 4, or 5, I think, out of this particular bike, especially the BMW. So I've stuck it at -3. And then with tire pressures, very similar story, in that I found putting the pressures to the minimum made the bike very sort of spongy and very out of control and wild, and you were kind of dropping it in a lot of places because you just didn't know kind of where the grip was, but the bike did feel more agile, whereas increasing the tire pressures to the absolute maximum did mean that the bike was very precise but not very easy to turn through the corners. So again, bit of a compromise here where we're 1 click off the minimum for pressure on dry. I think it's the same for the wet. I found was the best. Pressure on dry is at the midpoint, so 24.7, and pressure on the wet I think was the same. So sort of finding a compromise there. I was able to drop the pressures, I think, a little bit more on the super sports because you can be a little bit more wild on the super sports because you're doing less speed, less power. You feel a bit more in control anyway. Where I find on the super bikes, they are a lot more powerful and dropping those pressures can result in a little bit more instability. I prefer being able to get around a lap, essentially, rather than crashing everywhere. So, and fuel is another thing that you can change. You can change the fuel. If you want a really a full fuel tank, you can increase it. If you want to decrease it, you can have less. Does it make a difference? I have no idea whether it's just psychological at this point. Um, Knowing the people that made the game, that they were behind Rims Racing as well, which is another very interesting bike game if you're into bike games. That was kind of the precursor to this game. They used a lot of the same physics, a lot of the same stuff from that. Knowing the details they went into with Rims Racing, it probably does make a slight difference, but I haven't found any discernible difference really to the fuel. I've only been decreasing it recently, just as a bit of a psychological edge, just to know, okay, well, at least I don't have a full fuel tank. I think Dr. Ace did a video on whether fuel made a difference, and he found he could tell no discernible difference either. So, yeah, play around with the fuel, see what you think. Let me know whether you can tell a difference with that. And equally, if you guys have got any tips on tire pressures, suspension settings, transmission, controller settings, stuff that's worked for you, let me know, because I'm really interested to see what you guys think as well on this game, because it is quite a tricky one to get right, to get the setups right, to get the bikes working properly. It isn't an easy game to just take out of the box and get riding. It's very difficult to get the feeling that you want with these bikes. So let me know what you guys think. Get subscribed. Give me a like. We're working our way up to 250 subscribers. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for the support already, because it's fantastic to see all the comments and everything. But for the moment, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.